Alright, today we're going to look at what Nanobanana is, how to use it, and I'll be giving you up to 50 different tips for using this tool. So let's start with the basics, which is, what is Nanobanana? Well, many of us probably already know this. It's a fairly well-known name recently in the world of image generation models. It's the model launched by Google, or more specifically, their Gemini artificial intelligence model. And, well, what does it do? Obviously, it creates images, but it also helps us edit existing images. And all this using natural language through prompts, okay? So first, let's understand how we can access it, and we have different options. The first option would be to go to gemini.google.com, and here we would log into Gemini with our Google account and look for the create image option, as we can see here. Here we would write the prompt, send it, and obviously what we would do now is wait for the image to be generated. So artificial intelligence, as you'll see, is going to think a bit about what we need to do. Here I requested rather that it generate a person. It generated this here with this Gemini watermark to indicate that the image is made with artificial intelligence. As you can see, it looks super realistic, and now we could iterate with this image. For example, I'm going to ask for the buildings on the left to be on fire. If for any reason we wanted to go to another conversation, we could simply click new conversation or press Control plus Shift plus O. Or if you're on Mac, Command plus Shift plus Option plus O. Okay, and there we have it. For example, the buildings on the left in flames. And then on the other hand, we have option B, which is Google AI Studio. So within Google AI Studio, as you can see, we have this section called Playground. We would access it here. We have different tools like being able to search with Google Search, which is really great. And as you can see, if we select Nanobanana Pro here within the AI Studio Playground itself, we'll find different tools. So I understand that we want to generate an image, therefore we'll select that option. And we see options that are new, paid ones, and so on. Obviously, if it shows that it's paid, then you have to pay, okay? There's not much more to it. Let's select version 2.5, which is free and doesn't require us to use an API. As you can see, when selecting Gemini 3, it asks for a link API key. Why is this? Because we'll have to cover the generation costs ourselves. How much does generation cost? Well, what it shows here, the input and output costs. It's somewhat open-ended, but ultimately it charges by tokens, but that's a cost we don't need to pay because we can select Gemini 2.5 or whatever version is current. And as you can see, we have several more configuration options here. We have the option to add system instructions, right? This gives us the ability to assign a role to the AI, meaning we can request all generated images follow a specific artistic style. We would enter that here and then select it. Then we also have the API key and temperature settings, okay? Temperature basically controls how much creativity we allow the AI. The higher the creativity, the more it might deviate from what we specifically requested. For example, if we ask it to generate a person, it might create a person with their entire surroundings, as shown in this image. However, if we set creativity or temperature to minimum, it might only generate the person, right? Or even the person without clothes, okay? Basically, a doll, a mannequin-style figure. Obviously, we won't know until we try it, so I'll lower the temperature and we'll test it. I've asked it to generate a person with 0 temperature. The result was this. Now let's try with maximum. Honestly, I don't. In fact, it's almost generated the same image, right? With the coffee and everything, I only asked it to generate a person, you know? It changed the background and all, but, well, I don't see a big difference, even though I changed the settings. Next, we have the ratio, okay, in case we want it to generate an image, for example, in 16:9, which would be horizontal. I'll ask it again to generate a person for me. Now it should generate the image in 16:9 if it's listening to me, of course. And indeed, there we have it, the image, right? Clearly, this is artificial intelligence. Look at the eyes. Clearly, this isn't real, okay? Then we also have the more advanced configuration, which would be setting the maximum tokens for each response, okay? I'm not sure if we can remove the limit, or no, this is the limit if we want to set fewer because we're doing more technical tests related to development and such. Then the top P, which is basically more of the same, okay? It's a more technical section that doesn't concern us right now. So let's close this section now. Here we have the button to create a new. The comparison mode, okay? In case we want to compare, say, Nanobanana 2.5 with Image 4 Fast, okay? If we want to compare with different models, that's not what we're after. And this is for creating a new chat, got it? All right, let's begin with the 50 tips to master Nanobanana. And the first thing I really want you to understand is the importance of working in the same thread, okay? If we communicate that we've generated a person and then want the buildings on the left to be on fire, the AI keeps tracking these elements as important since we requested them earlier. What happens? If we suddenly create a new chat and simply send this image saying, hey, modify the background, it might remove what we previously requested, like the burning buildings and so on. So of course you'll say, well, but if we create a new chat, what we can do is add context that we don't want it to remove those burning buildings. Exactly. Creating a new chat isn't necessarily negative, but we must keep in mind that when we create a new chat, the AI loses context about the relevant aspects of that image. Therefore, we'll have to re-establish that context. Plus, a positive aspect of changing chats is exactly that, getting rid of the previous context. Let's say we're not happy with what we're generating and it's not going in the direction we wanted. Instead of fixing everything from scratch and applying patches here and there, we simply click the button to create a new conversation. The other advice, the second tip, is to request just one change each time we interact. For example, we have this image and we're going to ask for a museum to appear on the right side, okay? As you can see here, I've only requested one modification, even though it's significant and affects half of the image in terms of composition. I've simply asked for one change. If instead I were to say, I want flames on the left, a museum on the right, and I also want the central person dressed this way, and start adding many unnecessary modifications, what's going to happen? Well, most likely some changes won't be made because they're overlooked or might contradict each other according to the AI's logic. Plus, making changes one by one lets us see that while it added the museum, it merged the buildings in the center, so the result isn't quite right. So here we would explain and fix this error, thus avoiding accumulating multiple errors at once. The third tip is to define the final goal. Many times we generate an image, as I've done, right? It generates a person, creates this person here, and whatever happens, happens, right? Of course, what happens? Later, if what I had in mind was to generate a person with a background in the middle of the forest, okay? Generate a person who's alone with a campfire. Well, if that's what I wanted from the beginning, there's no need to complicate things. Let's ask for this directly instead of constantly going off track, right? And here, well, it did it for me. A person alone with a campfire in the middle of the forest, okay? Pretty good image, I have to say, huh? However, the fourth tip is that when you want finer control, give micro instructions, okay? And once we've defined our objective, let's say that, for example, the campfire looks too small, right? Well, I want a bigger, more mystical campfire, okay? Making the campfire larger, all right? We'll wait here for the modification. As you can see, it might take some time, okay? A bit more, well, I asked for more mystical, and there we have it, right? The campfire is now much bigger. This is what should happen, right? We should create a good image from the start and then make small tweaks to it, not have an image that needs 1,000 tiny modifications that don't make sense. On the other hand, we explained earlier that if we were going to create a new image, okay? I'm going to copy the image and paste it. We've pasted it there. Now, I'm going to ask that instead of there's a river, right? But for example, I don't want it to remove the tree on the left, okay? Or the campfire. So then I need to specify that, right? So I tell it, put a river on the left without removing any relevant elements. Obviously, this is quite open-ended, isn't it? Then I specify elements like the tree, the person, the campfire. So now I'll send this image and let it process. And there we have it, okay? It puts the river on the left while keeping the tree, campfire, and person untouched, right? In fact, if you notice, it's the same posture, the same position. The same overall, almost nothing has changed. If for some reason the edit was too exaggerated, okay? For example, well, I'm going to request it. Sometimes we might ask for a modification and I don't know, instead of making a river, it creates a whole valley with a giant waterfall, and the human removes it. This is more referring to when we've made a mistake, okay? We didn't specify not to modify the filter, for example. Look, here they've modified the filter, making the flame much bigger and so on. So here we have two options, okay? We ask it to return to the original composition, which I should tell you often doesn't work, but we'll try it. And well, it worked, okay? It more or less worked. It removed the river, okay? But then we'd have the option to use these three buttons, okay? Telling it branch from here, okay? Or even okay, it says look at the original, it says. Even here where I ask it to make a very exaggerated edit, I edit this message, okay? Well, we mess things up, and what I do is, hey, don't make a very exaggerated edit. Put a bird drinking water from the river. I hit enter, okay? I click rerun this run, okay? I don't know if you've seen it, but now I'm generating something new. No, you won't see it, okay? I click that button here, rerun this run, which basically restarts what we had, and we can just delete this, okay? We can delete the bottom part, and that's it. As you can see, I asked it to show a bird drinking from the river, and it's drinking almost from the campfire. This is a mistake, right? So we'd apply it again. We'd click edit, put a bird drinking water from the river on the left. We click stop editing and then rerun. Can this be done in Google Gemini too? Yes, it can. Edit request. I want to see a museum on the right, also burning. Well, okay, let's stop with the burning. Let's see some graffiti, okay? I don't want a museum anymore, I want graffiti. So I'll add that. Important note, by doing this, we'll lose the previous image, okay? Keep that in mind. And now it puts the bird, well, it's struggling with the bird, huh? It showed a bird pointing left, drinking from the water of the river on the left. There we go. As you see, we can play around, modifying the same image without needing, look, I did it there too, without having to start the conversation from scratch, which is really important and one of the most useful tips I can give you. And well, there we more or less have it, right? The bird isn't pointing left, but let's accept it, okay? Great, when something turns out almost right, like in this case, okay? About this little bird, clearly we see an obvious error here where the bird appears to be inserted almost as if they've taken the duck image and made a collage for us, right? So here we could use slightly more technical language, like specifying that it should adapt the shadow to the environment, right? This bird doesn't have a shadow, right? We could ask for the bird's reflection in the water and to lower the saturation. So let's ask for that. So here I've said, put a bird facing left, which was the error we were having. Well, maybe it came out wrong because I wrote it incorrectly. Looking left, I mean with its beak pointing left, drinking from the river on the left, and I added, include shadows and reflections adapted to the environment, okay? And now we can see it's added a bit of shadow. The reflection didn't come out that well, but it did capture a bit of the campfire. And look, now I've regenerated it and it looks much better. It placed the bird here. Unfortunately, it's not putting it on the left. It's not making this easy for me, but well, there we have the bird. Another option would be to create versions. And here are two tips for you. The first, which is very common when working with projects, is to save different versions, okay? For example, this version is good, so right click and we would save it. This way we create a history of our work. It's true that Google AI Studio and Google Gemini chats are automatically saved. If we want to save them, we can also save the link to the chat itself, okay? This creates a history we can access later if our image gets ruined or we've strayed too far from what we wanted. And of course, going back up to find which chat was which among all we created can be a bit problematic, especially if we use AI tools frequently. But on the other hand, it's important that we save those prompts we've used that we consider really good, okay? For example, right now I'm in ChatGPT, right? And I have this prompt here, this giant prompt, which basically allows me to generate, okay, let me go back to the previous one. It's to generate an image like this, right? Well, obviously it doesn't look very good here and so on. But let's say this prompt is quite long and I want to save it to modify it later and so on. Well, it's important that you save it, okay? Have your own prompt library, an organized way to store these prompts. How can you do this? You can save it on Google Drive to keep it online. You can save locally in text files, in Google Docs, in Excel, or wherever you, but save them, okay? Save them because designing a good prompt might take you an hour or two, and that's time you'll optimize. We're using AI not just to do things we couldn't do in real life, right? That is, reproducing this image in real life would be impossible for many, and it also helps optimize our work time, right? Alright, let's move on to the 10th tip. And this one will help you avoid frustration. Assume that 80% of results will take 1 to 3 iterations, okay? Meaning it won't work on the first try, and you'll likely need to rework your prompt multiple times to get good results. Often it's not that your prompt is wrong, but rather the AI isn't able to understand what you want, okay? Sometimes even with the same prompt, it gives me different solutions, right? Now it's suddenly added a water reflection, which it didn't do before. So we often need to interact with the AI multiple times to achieve the result we're looking for, okay? For example, this result is incredible, right? This reflection is much more realistic and this bird looks way better than the previous one, okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. Let's move on to the 10th tip, which is to use a template, okay? How can we use a template? First of all, in the description, you'll find a free ebook on image generation for Nanobanana and ChatGPT if you're interested. In there, we have templates and all kinds of resources, but basically with a template, the first thing we do is define the general aspects, right? First, we would define the environment. We can organize it however we want, left to right, or maybe define the atmosphere first, like fog, then continue describing. We're in a foggy forest with very leafy trees. Then what we'd do is define a bit more detail. After defining the environment, we'd specify the subject, the action the subject is performing, right? Or the position of the subject. The lighting too, since it's a general element, we'd define that at the beginning. And the camera settings, obviously, at the very beginning, right? For instance, if we want the image to have a 16:9 aspect ratio, we see that here already. Before we've written anything, it's already asking for it, okay? So you can see. So here, for example, in Google Gemini, where we don't have that configuration option, we would specifically request 16:9, okay? Just like that, 16:9. Lens, X lens, okay? Canon G21 lens, I have no idea, right? And from there, we start generating the image, okay? The 12th tip is to add golden hour or sunset lighting or soft window light. Basically, let's try to play a little with colors, okay? For example, in this image here, you can see that the sky is completely white. So let's ask it to, I tell it to use golden hour lighting and ask it to carefully handle the illumination and reflections, right? Obviously, it's a very vague instruction, but it's something that will make our image look much better and more detailed than it would initially, okay? Because here we're seeing that the white color is absolutely pure. That is, if I check this now, it's probably FFF, no. Well, a bit off FFF, okay? We're talking about something very exaggerated. Here, obviously, well, it went overboard, okay? But now it gives us a bit more clouds, a bit more color, right? Here it adds a slightly more realistic touch. I'm going to request this in the other image too, so you can see it. An important tip is to pay attention to the environment, okay? Look, there it changed to golden hour. It's just that, well, it changes so much, right? Here the ambiance is really well crafted because for some reason the images are generated in an incredible way. I want you to notice an important detail. When I asked it to generate the golden hour, it removed the bird we had here, okay? Very important detail. That's why it's crucial to specify not to remove certain elements, okay? Because it might eliminate them, as happened with the bird, right? Important things to keep in mind. In this case, I don't mind. We're iterating, we're testing. Actually, I'm going to ask rather for fog in the distance and request a rerun because I see this forest is already a bit dark and the fog could start to descend now. We have a campfire going, which suggests it's probably cold, right? Well, there's fog in the distance. Well, if you had written it correctly, okay? The bird removed me again, as you can see. The fog might be too strong, but anyway, we're starting to see the modifications, right? Then we can ask for other things, okay? Let's move on to the 13th tip, which would be, for example, a lens, okay? A specific lens, an 85mm lens. I think we're getting too advanced in the prompt now. In this conversation, we've already iterated several times and should probably change direction, okay? Well, we've only iterated 4 times, not that many, but it's true that requesting the lens would be better from the start, right? But anyway, here we would ask for an 85mm lens, right? And this, what would it do? Well, it would mainly change how the image looks. In this case, it barely changed it, right? It barely changed it at all. Let's also ask for camera effects, like having a blurred background without overdoing it. So I'll say background out of focus, especially in the area of the trees in the background, okay? I'll do a rerun. We could also request different angular grains, okay? For example, a low angle shot, we could ask for different compositions. Look, there it has blurred almost the entire image a little bit, right? For that, I recommend you search for cinematic composition. If you don't know much, go to images and you'll find quite a few examples, right? You can take these reference compositions, okay? Choose the ones you like best and ask the AI to maintain that composition. That's one of the tips that will make your images look more professional, okay? I'll tell you this, if you manage to do it, probably we're already getting into more Photoshop usage and such, not purely AI, but if you respect these cinematic compositions, it will obviously make your image much better and not look like a collage, right? Then on the other hand, if we wanted more of a documentary style look, we can ask for different filters, okay? Well, let's say I want it in black and white. Okay, all right, let's take this image and I'll tell it black and white, and it will take the image and convert it to black and white. Or if I want to give it a yellowish filter, I'll apply that. We can do that too. Tip number 16 is that if you need more extreme realism, we can request textures, a texture of, look, fabric texture. Oh, it says I've reached the limit. Well, no problem. We copy the image, go to another playground, paste it, tell it fabric texture with Nanobanana, hit run, and start from there. That's it. And here it should change the fabric texture, right? It hasn't done it. I'm going to be a bit more specific, okay? I tell it to change from I say change the image texture to fabric texture. And there it did it, see? Now we have that more fabric-like texture. Basically, it just put a fabric overlay on top, and that's it, right? It's not very complicated. We could also ask that in case the model invents things, we could request it not to add those things, right? In the past, it was very, very common for a hand to have, for example, 6 fingers, right? In this case, there are 5. But, for example, when creating a long prompt, defining it well, as I mentioned, right? First, the environment. Hey, I want a foggy forest, etc. Then the subject. Okay, I want the subject. So let's define the characteristics of the subject. The subject will be this color. I want it blue, avatar style. I want it to be an alien, and so on. And the fingers, I want them to have 3 fingers, not 5. Obviously, this falls under the concept of negative prompt, meaning within our prompt, we first write a positive prompt and then the negative part of the prompt. What does the negative part mean? These are all the prohibitions that the AI cannot do, okay? It's defined in 2 parts, meaning we would literally write here positive, right? Positive prompt, and here we would write the entire prompt, okay? And then separately, we would write the negative prompt, okay? And here we would list all the prohibitions. How do we know what to prohibit? Because obviously, if we have to list everything that can't be done, we could be here all afternoon. What we do is generate the image, and once it's generated, we identify the errors it made. For example, the eyes are too dilated. We would forbid that in the negative prompt, okay? We see it generates ugly text and logos, so we tell it no text or logos, or if we want no background, we just say no background, right? Anyway, let's move on to the editing section now, okay? For example, the quick fix option, okay? Like correcting white balance, exposure. Let's send it to this image and see what it does. We'll say directly, color the image, so you can see how far AI can really go. What it can do, oops, sorry, I made a mistake, right? I was wrong. Okay, now let's color the image. We hit run, and what the AI is going to do now is recolor this image. It will tell me, here's the colored image. We can also ask for things like increase the saturation a bit, the intensity, improve the color palette, okay? Look, it has already colored it, almost leaving it like before, right? We can ask for anything. For example, this other modification we can make, right? So tip 19 would be, for example, face modifications, right? Let's say someone has acne, or in this case, wrinkles. Remove wrinkles from the main subject. So we send that prompt, and what it's going to do now is try to remove those wrinkles. Obviously, sometimes these modifications can be quite exaggerated, but this is a huge improvement because before you had to do this manually, right? And now when you input the person, they still have some small wrinkles, but much less, see? I mean, there's no middle ground at all. We just took 20 years off this woman. And if I now say, remove the wrinkles from the main subject completely, I think it'll do something even more dramatic. But from a distance, you can already see it's taken off quite a few years, right? There it is, see? Now this is what I was talking about, how sometimes it can exaggerate a bit, okay? For example, it leaves my hand a bit wrinkled while making my face almost brand new, right? So these are details we should keep in mind. Good tip number 20. Let's say we have this image, okay? This image is broken. So what I'm going to ask is to reconstruct it. I'm going to say, reconstruct the broken image respecting the features and continuity, okay? This way we could try to reconstruct an image that we have broken somewhere, right? And there we have the reconstruction, okay? As you can see, the person more or less left it, well, they've left it the same, okay? It will try to reconstruct all those missing parts, and I think it's done quite well, okay? Then we also have the option to remove objects, right? Remove X and fill with a coherent background, right? For example, I'm going to ask it to, well, in this image, things aren't very clear. Let's use another one. For example, remove the taxi, right? Or remove the car. We'll tell it that it's on the left, from the left, and I'll say, remove the car on the left and put a luxury car, right? And it does it for me without any problem, okay? It puts in the luxury car. This way we can remove and add objects, okay? Obviously, we could ask it to respect perspective, shadows, reflections, right? Generally, it will do this automatically, but if not, we can specify it. Tip number 23 would be changing the look, okay? For example, make the main subject's hair brown and dress them in 90s clothing. Okay, we're asking for 2 changes at once, which is fine. And this way we could change the look. We could also change the lighting, as we've seen before. Let's see if it made well, this time it changed my clothes, my hair. Well, chestnut, it's not really brown. Let's take a closer look, right? Chestnut isn't brown, but look, it put me in 90s clothes. So there we have it. Then we could ask, as I mentioned, to change the lighting, right? As we said before, the same scene, but at night. Then tip 25 would be, for example, changing only the background. So I'm going to tell it not to touch the subject and to place them in a nightclub. It tells me, here's the image of the subject in a nightclub without modifying the person. And there we have it, okay? It didn't touch the person, see? Obviously, the image looks very strange, but it did what I asked. Then tip number 26 would be, for example, editing a small detail, okay? Replace, for example, instead of removing an object, it would be like replacing the sky. No, better replace the graffiti. No, better the building on the left with a park. We send it, do a rerun, and there we have it. See? Perfect. It still keeps the supercar. The left side is now a much nicer park, right? We were talking a bit about image composition. So the image composition was a little off to the left, a bit strange. The perspective of the trees of the buildings seemed to point nowhere, to no place. Do you see how the line of those trees points toward this gentleman more or less, just above that gentleman, and these others point elsewhere, so everything was very unbalanced, but in this case, we're starting to see a better composition, right? Well, anyone who really knows about composition will kill me here, but just so you can understand a bit, we can also restore old images, okay? It restores the image by repairing cracks and such, colorizing it. Obviously, we can add specific details here, right? If we knew this person was supposed to be yellow instead of white, we can specify that, right? In this case, I don't think it'll be very complicated, but there we have it, okay? Of course, if we knew for certain this suit was brown instead of green, well, or if the pants were more brownish, we can specify that without any problem. Okay, but I think it's pretty accurate. Tip number 28 would be to complete from a fragment, okay? Use a bit of creative exploration. So, for example, we have this house, and let's say we have half of it and want to generate the other part, but we're not sure how because the image doesn't show it. So I'd say generate the entire house viewed from outside, and then it would extend the generation. I'm explaining the perspective here, right? As if you're on the street looking at it from outside, okay? Here it has already expanded the image significantly, as we can see, which is already a positive point, right? And here it is. That's what we were looking for, isn't it? We have the house here, see? And it understands that it will look like this. So there we have it. As you can see, it recreated even the buildings. The ones on the right, those in the back, it maintained the context very well. Well, this building on the left is a bit off, but everything else, there we have it. Another option we have would be for e-commerce, okay? For example, changing the color of a can, an advertisement, changing the dress worn, or changing the model. Right, we can also provide references. Meaning, if we have this person here and want to replace them with someone else, we can request, swap the main subject with this other one and send an image. I don't have the aspect ratio defined here, but it's done it for me, see? It changes the main subject for me. As you can see, it keeps the clothing and everything, but changes the model slightly so you can get an idea of how that person might look in this generation, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Also, as tip number 30, we could search for a person's resemblance, okay? We could upload several photos from the front profile or with different expressions, okay? To give artificial intelligence a bit more context about how that person would look, okay? Also, if we wanted to prevent it from inventing features, we could prioritize facial identity over style, right? We would explain this to it, wouldn't we? We'd say, for example, keep the previous subject's clothes and posture and just change the face. Also, when mixing 8 or 13 images, we can first ask for a draft, okay? And then color everything based on that draft. This way we'd be working in a more basic approach. It's something commonly done in drawing, okay? Well, now it's really messing things up for me, come on. Or also for collages, right? Let's say we use, I don't know, 5 images and want to make a collage, okay? Well, we could paste them together without any problem. Then tip number 34 is that, for example, in this case, the model is forgetting everything that was there before, right? Well, I'm going to delete this prompt now and I'll ask it, okay? I'll say, well, give me a checklist with all the elements in the image so they won't be deleted in the future. In other words, you don't have to memorize every essential element in the image. You can just ask the AI to analyze it for you, okay? For example, we have the main subject, a woman with brown hair, no wrinkles, wearing 90s style clothing and so on. Then the background, a park on the left with trees and a bench, a red Ferrari on the left, a building with graffiti on the right, streets and people in the background, sunlight, sunset, and well, it generated this image because it wanted to, right? Or because I wrote the word future well, and because this model is probably required to generate images. This way we'd have this list of essential elements, right? Oh, we've been requesting these elements so we don't forget objects and such. Then when sending a prompt, it will take these elements into account. We can also ask for a model sheet, right? For example, we have this user here. I'm going to say generate a sheet. I'll say generate a model sheet with 4 views, front, profiles, and back, okay? We're using the image we regenerated earlier. Let's see what it creates. Look, there we have it, okay? And honestly, it turned out amazing, right? I mean, we almost have a character that we could model in 3D almost ready. And we could use this model sheet we just created instead of saying, hey, replace this girl with this other one and sending a poor quality image. Having a well-made model sheet, right? Tip number 37 would be, for storytelling, establish clear rules, okay? For example, the same clothes, I want the same colors, the same age, the same palette. That is, when we're using multiple images and telling a story with them, it's important to maintain these rules we established here, right? Brown hair, no wrinkles, clothing from the 90s. If we have model sheets, even better, because they help maintain the character's context and details, okay? And if for some reason the character changes too much between scenes, we can use the model sheet, right? Don't bother going modifying every little trait image by image when you can create a good structure, a solid initial prompt, a good reference to avoid recreating the same character from scratch repeatedly, okay? Then, on the other hand, if we wanted to generate more us, things like video or keyframes, okay? Well, we generate an initial frame and a final frame with the same character in the same style, okay? Just as a tip, we'd keep constants, okay? I mean, if we're going to generate a video based on 2 images, which is typical in AI, an initial and final image, it's important that both images have the same lens, time of day, clothing. Otherwise, the transition between images will be too jarring. And if the action we're doing is very complex, it's important to create more keyframes. And if something breaks within the keyframes, it's important that you fix it, okay? Whether it's the hands or whatever. This obviously can't be taught here. I don't know if there's video capability. I see. No, you can generate videos with VO, okay? Let's see, if I click copy image, can I paste the image or not? No, without images, right? I've exceeded the quota. Yes, indeed. 10 out of 10 generations. Okay, well, no. Then also regarding architecture, right? We could ask it to empty the room, for example, right? Remove furniture, okay? Like these chairs here, for example. We could ask it to respect the structure and lines, modernizing walls and furniture. We can also ask it to add a specific object as we did with the subjects. For more subtle changes, we could ask it to improve the paint without changing the layout, doors, or windows, okay? Obviously, these are tips we've seen before with this image here, which we can modify over time without any problem. The same goes for structures. And regarding typography, there was a moment when it started generating typography for me. Now for the final tips. And to create a more realistic typography, we can ask it to write with that exact font. For example, we want it to write in Arial, right? Or in Poppins. If we want that specific font type, we just ask for it, okay? I want you to generate with these types of fonts. If we can provide the font reference, even better. And then for text with material textures, right? For example, use the texture of the coat, okay? Like in this case, using 3D CGI text with realistic volume So it adapts to the shirt folds rather than just pasting it directly as would happen with graffiti, right? Adapting the texture, reflections. It'll do this automatically most of the time, but you could also adapt ads to another language, okay? Ask it to translate them. And finally, if we're creating a mock-up with labels, bottles, and such, we can ask it to first generate the label and then apply it to the bottle. That is, generate things in parts and then combine everything together rather than constantly modifying the same image. As I mentioned, maybe I ask it to modify the can and it accidentally removes the Ferrari from here, right? Or here, right? I say, make the can yellow, and for some reason it removes the ice, okay? Of course, these are things we can generate separately and work on individually, as we did here, or had been doing until I changed pages, creating a model and so on. If we work in a more organized way, it will obviously function better for us. Clearly, we're now getting into something more complex as we've finished with the 50 tips. I've been explaining for an hour now. I think that's more than enough. Obviously, there are many tips here and you won't need all of them. On the other hand, many others will be very useful, okay? And which ones you use depends on you. I think there are very interesting things like editing images, understanding that images go from general to specific, understanding that we can modify different elements or even create elements like this and have a model reference, understanding the context of the chats. And well, really, the best way to learn is to experiment with AI yourself. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this and I'll see you in future videos. Bye bye.